monitoring. Really good report. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and have you got a presentation as well? Yes? Okay. This is the citizen science one. Yes, this is item number 5, and this is on page 8, I think it is.
Page 6.
Oh, sorry, page 6. Okay,
Morning.
would you like to start, Ed?
Excellent. Morning. Thank you for having me here, councillors, to discuss citizen science. Do I move it on, or does it?
What's that? Yes.
So yeah, the opportunity is to highlight citizen science, particularly in the environmental monitoring and science areas. It's not across the whole organisation, but it's that focus. Next slide, please. A lot of the work is from these 2 reports. So the first report is an inventory across New Zealand, and it's really detailed. It was done, I believe, 2016, updated 2018. And the author of that, Monica Peters, also helped the Regional Council in 2018 with the other report there, which is looking at potential opportunities. So there's those 2 very valuable resources available. And a lot of my work relies on those. So I may not have referenced it continuously, but that's a key point.
Okay, thank you.
Next slide, please. And so citizen science, bit of background, which is particularly from these reports, broadly describes investigations that the public can do, and they bring forward information around the natural world. A note there is that probably if you look at the census, you won't find anyone who's put themselves down as a citizen scientist, or I would imagine. And there's examples such as we have a lot of people, as you'll see in later slides, providing rainfall data to us. They're providing that because they were doing it already, or they have an interest. They wouldn't have then put on a hat to say, I'm a citizen scientist. So I think some people may also find that a term they don't align with. They feel that, as a lot of people, they're just doing their bit, and that may just be because it's in my backyard or they have an interest. So it leverages on community groups. And so that's an example of that with the community groups, and there was some in the report. It's because these people had an interest either in a stream or pest plants or pest animals within their local community. And so they've formed a community group. Within that, they can be collecting a lot of information, such as when you're putting traps out and you're counting the number of deaths, or if you're fortunate enough to take surveys of activities. And so it's often numbers and counts. Those community groups could also be leveraged if we saw an issue that we needed to work with to possibly collect further information. One of the issues with funding these groups is to keep them established and to keep them going if there's not a wider purpose. And so often just the monitoring aspect may not be enough. There's a greater cause to begin with, such as a community group. And a lot of the monitoring that we do as council is long-term, and so you'll see papers coming up on the groundwater nitrates. Some of those records go back decades. And so to enable continuity, if you want to look at long-term, there does need to be a management and a funding framework around that, compared to some of the examples in the report of one-off blitzes, where possibly there could be a park or a community area, and you want to know the range of pest plants there or native plants. And so you can have a weekend where you just go and you work on that. There can also be concerns around, I guess, the accuracy of the information. It can indicate a water quality, but maybe not changes in water quality over short distances along a reach or a river, or over time. And often that's because of the tools that could be used. Sometimes they might be using litmus paper to indicate degrees of chemistry, but it is enabling greater contact than what people would have otherwise. So it is a very good engagement approach. It may not be the reporting that would go into, say, the science department, state and trends reporting. Next slide, please. And these are some examples so daily rainfall readers, there's about 25 farmers who take daily rainfall readings. They were doing it anyway. We have supplied them a rain gauge, a particular one, so it's standardized, and they send those records in monthly. And that builds onto our automated network that fills in those gaps in between. Another one on our website, which is great action, is the green wheel. And it's the green wheel describes, if you haven't seen it on the website, it is a wheel and you get reporting, basically get green bits coming out, and the longer that green bit, that's a good aspect. So it might be fencing off of that kahikatea stand, and so there can be observations. And so the green wheel gives you instantly look at it and you can see it, oh, that looks good or bad, as a nice sort of indicator. And so that relies on individuals who want to report on their own kahikatea stands. And so there's an ability through our website to do that. And beach profile surveys, so that's where people have been measuring the sand up and down the beach, and they do that on a regular basis to look at the changes from storm events. Next slide, please. So I guess when looking at the opportunities, there does need to be a clear objective or purpose to what may, particularly for the council's direction. And one of those reasons is a clear objective means you know when you've met the endpoint too, because is it a short-term monitoring or long-term? Is it a need that is direct to council's, I guess, responsibilities? Or is it a need which is already covered by existing monitoring? Or is there a gap in the current monitoring? And so really working on that. And so there's a lot of guidance in that internal report to tease out those questions and to work towards that. A lot of the issues that probably have changed, in some ways I would have thought maybe there might have been more community monitoring more than 10 years ago, pre a lot of health and safety, because it does, I believe, curtail a lot of opportunities. Particularly if we are to fund and to send people out next to rivers or sites, it does start to cross that boundary where we are sending people to if we're sending them to a location and we're putting funds into that, we send them to our work location. And so, yeah, there are a lot of issues to work through, which is the same with our team, such as when our staff work around water, we go through a 3-step minimum water competency training, which will be the type of rivers they can go to, testing them swimming with clothes on in a swimming pool, right through to swift water training and other activities. So that is potentially the similar expectation if we expect it for our staff that we would then need to expect for others that we could be funding. Yeah, next slide, please. I won't go through this table, it's just to highlight it was in the report and it's in the internal report, but it's some of those questions to tease out the objectives and the purpose of any citizen science projects that could occur. Next slide, please. So some opportunities, just looking around at the work we do. So obviously increased working with our iwi partners. There's, we're doing it through Section 33 with Tuwharetoa, but there's numerous other opportunities. We have already made ourselves known to such as farming groups who have said, we would like to undertake our own water quality monitoring to understand a catchment. And if they're getting samples sent to a lab, we've said, particularly if it was to hills, well, we can automate that coming to our data systems. We can do QA, QC, we can store that data for you, make it available. And so there's an automated system there that can occur and put surety around that data. So that's not an onerous, we have systems set up. Farm plans will be coming in, as we've talked about earlier, but that will have lots of information, environmental, particularly around the wetlands, location of wetlands. When there's 10,000 we need to monitor. I do note we have just appointed this, starting on the 12th of September, the first 2 staff who will be working in that area, monitoring for wetlands. But they're working very closely with the GIS where they are dealing with that new technology, and these will do the ground truthing of satellite imagery. The rain gauge network, that is potentially one there with the hobby rain gauge systems where we could put those out in numerous catchments. And so working with ICM, because particularly the Coromandel where you've got numerous subcatchments and the storm events seem to fall in between our rain gauges. It's, you know, Murphy's Law's concept. As in we do get the rainfall, but everyone will say it was this much heavier, we think, in this area. So potentially that's an opportunity there. Safe swim records, we fund already, I think we support Lifesaving New Zealand at locations, and we also do monitoring there if we could work those together. And we as staff are just looking at drone imagery for measuring river flows, and potentially that's something that the public could then take on once we knew the system. Again, there's lots of constraints around that, such as flying drones around, particularly because most of our measurement sites are near bridges and things like that. So, and the fish barrier work that's undertaking under the NPSFM, potentially people with eyes just to notice fish barriers, have an app to load that in, which exists already and is operated through NIWA, and to facilitate that further. We do plan to do a lot of that work with summer students, but it could be easily supplemented. So there's some opportunities, and I think that's the end of the presentation. Next slide is blank. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, quick question from Stu, and then I've just got one as well.
The work that Te Whare Toa do for us under section 33, I wouldn't have thought you'd call that citizen science, or?
No. And I think there's a note in my paper, particularly around Aotearoa Māori as well. But the section 33 was one approach to enable iwi to undertake activities in Te Mana. Potentially a less formalised approach could also occur with them as long with other community groups.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that, that there's quite a lot of potential here for around the engagement, increasing engagement and connection with the community. It's like one of the spaces where it makes it easier for us to do it, because there are people out there who already have passions and want to actually do this kind of work to help us. And I also can see that there is a win-win sometimes. You know, sometimes people might be complaining to us about something, for instance, to do with use of pesticides, and if they want to reduce use of pesticides, you know, they can actually get involved in a trap, you know, running a trap line or something like that, and provide data back to us. One thing that I did just want to ask a question about, because you said in your report that there's no central citizen science database to enable community members to, you know, to upload, store and access data. I just wondered about the Wellbeing Project, because when the Wellbeing Project first started, I remembered them talking about having a centralised database where people can upload. And I mean, I guess it's not a specialised thing, but I wondered whether there's anything that can be done through the Wellbeing Project to enable that kind of thing to happen.
Potentially, and I guess that comment particularly comes from the reports that they'd noticed across New Zealand.
Yeah.
So it would be difficult for someone in a community to easily find out about all the programs of work that they might have an interest to join, or if they were thinking of starting something, how they could, would they know, do they just keep all their results and information in a drawer at home?
Yeah.
That they share with a small group of people. There's not something that brings a lot of people together. So it's just, well-being potentially. It was just acknowledging, I guess, a lack of a system. And a system, if it's anything like LAWA, would then need a management around it and funding, and I guess that protocols then start to come out, such as people, as we've had in the past, just sending in paper records, hoping someone's going to type it out and enter it, or people entering things through apps. So it does require that effort, and I think that's why it's talking about on a national scale. There needs to be that, that cohesion.
So you do think it needs to be national? It couldn't just be through something like the Waikato, through the Wellbeing Project? Better to be national. Okay.
That was from the paper. And we local, as in the green wheel as an example, where there's a point on our website, and if people manage to find that or hear about it, that's the risk is we have multiple of those either across our region, let alone across the country. And so, yes, we might be able to bring it together a wee bit for our region, but
it is quite difficult finding things on our website. Anyway, yes. That's another question. Now, Dennis, are you available to speak now?
Yes, I am. Yes. Thank you. Yes, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. Really good to see this report and the attention given to citizen science. I was just looking at the one of your last slides where you had a list of potential areas where the council could maybe look at expanding citizen science, and the one that sort of sticks out to me is the one relating to safe water for swimming, and for a couple of reasons for that. First of all, it doesn't really rely on being robust enough to, to comply with the Environment Court standards. And secondly, when the last lot of information came out, I actually publicised it locally, and there was an amazing amount of interest in it. People were really, really interested in, they were keen to know what their local beach was like. It seems it has benefit in terms of sort of collaboration and leveraging off existing groups. So I think your report mentioned surf lifesaving or maybe harbour care groups for estuaries. And some of these, the surf lifesaving's been around forever, but harbour groups have also long-standing groups, so maybe there's less of a risk of them sort of falling by the wayside. And I think they'd be really keen, to be involved in something like this. And then secondly, thirdly, it's restricted just to summer, so it's not a whole year program. And then I just look back at, I think early in the triennium, I suggested that there should be an additional testing site, I think in the Whangmata estuary, and Tracy pointed out to me, there was a volunteer who travelled around one day, and to add another one to the end of a very long day was actually quite difficult. And so there's this sort of conflict between resourcing and then the ability to ease that resourcing by using volunteers. So it strikes me as one that we could perhaps move to the top of the list in terms of actioning. So I'd like your comment around that. Thanks.
No, I agree. In the coastal area, particularly the Coromandel, so staff have to leave Hamilton. It's a long drive before they've even taken the first sample.
Yeah.
And then they take the last sample, and then it's a long drive to get them back to the lab, and you have to get back at a certain temperature and a certain time. So hence adding more samples and then going later in the evening. The staff are happy and keen, but then we don't meet the lab requirements. So any ways that we can either work with local communities and then rely on a courier to then get samples back. And so yes, open to those options. And
yeah, great. So I'm just wondering, Chair, whether there's any appetite for some sort of resolution or recommendation that at least that area be advanced. So I'll just leave that thought with you. I mean, I'm happy to move a.
Do you have some wording there, Dennis?
Well, I haven't really thought about it actually. I'm only just I suppose something along the lines of the committee recommends the safe water swimming citizen science area be be subject to a priority review or some words like that.
So we review a partial review of the surface water and coastal networks before each summer. And so as part of that review, we would look at the context of.
Okay.
So that's very achievable.
Sorry, Chair, I hadn't really given any thought to resolution. It just occurred to me it might be a way of just advancing that.
That's right. Is it okay, Dennis, if Fred makes a comment, or have you got something else to say?
No,
Fred?
that's fine. Sorry, there was just one other area. Ed, that was eDNA, which I think was missed off your report. And I just wondered, I know that Landcare Trust, are taking in information from community groups and the public and landowners, and I think they're putting it up on a map where you can, see information. Are we tapping into that? Are we making any sort of use of that sort of data?
I can't say for sure, because that would fall, I guess, more under previous staff such as Bruno David, and who was a fish expert, so the wealth of information that he would go and source for his analysis. And so we, in the monitoring team, we don't store other agencies' data. We don't double store. So in that way, that's why.
No, just in sense of tapping into someone else's data. Do we take advantage of it?
Yeah, eDNA is not left out specifically, potentially under the barriers to fish passage. That would be one of the tools that could then come in. A conversation I have had is it still requires some expertise, and so we would need to look at training and skills, because of I guess what's on a person's hands has a huge influence on what may come back from the lab and,
Right. Yeah,
and where they sample and things like that. So there still needs to be quite a few controls put in place. And so, yes, it definitely is an opportunity. And I think we have this conversation in a couple of years. I think we'll be seeing it utilised a lot more.
Right. Thank you.
Dennis, I might just get Brent to make a quick comment before we move on to Fred.
Sure.
Thanks, Fred.
So just a comment for Ed, really. I wonder whether or not we could pick this issue up rather than just off the cuff trying to think of what a resolution might look like, to pick this up through the matters arising section so that Ed could come back to the next session of this committee, presuming this committee exists, with some ideas about how we might progress the sorts of matters that you've raised today, Councillor Tegg.
Yeah, look, I'm happy with that. That's fine.
Then that could then lend itself into proceeding that into an annual plan type conversation, which is these are the sorts of ideas. This would what be the resourcing and financial implications of delivering that sort of a project. And so Ed could bring something back through matters arising if that works for you.
Yeah, that works for me. Thanks.
Works for you, Ed?
Okay. Fred.
Yahoo. We're putting it off again. Look, citizen science, if you look at Whangaroa Harbour Care, and we have contributed the valid information through Hills Laboratories, like road waste, and made significant changes to how things were done. You may remember this machine that used to go along road reserve or edges of the road. It was like a rotary slasher, and it pushed all the grass and material into the water tables in preference to spraying it. And all of that material that they scraped into the water tables ran down and into the receiving environment. We took some samples of that and discovered that everything that were in brake pads, nickel, copper, was in excessive amounts that was being distributed into the coastal marine area. Those lab results were handed over to Regional Council and entered into the database, and that machine was no longer allowed to use. So, it had a really good result. Citizen science, though, not what just Dennis was talking about. We have real gaps in our area, particularly on the West Coast, with what's in the coast. We have divers, we have fishermen, to be able to give information on different species that are hauled out of the sea, to actually get that information, to enter it into our own regional database managed by our regional council for a purpose, like our coastal plan reviews, that we actually can know. Fishing boats have GPS, take a photograph, or most phones have all that. You can really, with a photo of the thing you've caught, it's pretty substantial evidence that that's exactly what was there, So I think what Dennis and what's been alluded to will save us a hell of a lot of money. Again, 27 years of monitoring in the Whangaroa Harbour, that was before digital cameras, and all of this stuff is sitting there going mouldy in files to upload to look. A photograph of a particular area 27 years ago, whether it be beach, mudflat, estuary, and we've done associated shellfish monitoring, all of that work, it's all there. But really, I was just going, well, what a waste of time. 27 years worth of work, we're just about ready to wind up, and who cares at the end of the day? Where if it was contributed to an organisation like that, I'd feel quite chuffed that there is some historical information that we have taken, sweated over, is there to be looked at and into the future. So I think it's something that's incredibly valuable, cost effective, even though it will cost a bit to set up, but I think we should definitely head in that direction. Thank you.
So I'm happy to actually have a recommendation rather than a staff action if that's what people support. I just wonder whether we need to tweak the wording of what we started with Dennis's option? I mean, do we need to actually, for instance, make it very specific to harbours? Or,
Look,
you know, I guess that
just
might
to
be
start
a
with.
question, you know, if we were going to start with a project which we thought was a high priority project, would that be the thing to do?
As in, would harbours be the thing to do?
Mm.
It comes back to, I guess, that question about objectives and purpose.
Mm.
So do we feel that we have a priority where there's a lack of information for harbours?
Yes, sir.
Over others. And so I guess those are the drivers to then do that.
I mean, we have been
And
told
so,
there's a lack of data.
Yes. So Jonathan will also be banging on me to go, I'd like some more air quality monitoring sites like this, the NPSFM. So I'm not disagreeing, I guess, but if you're asking me,
It's where
there is a lack of information everywhere, and I know the
It's-
coastal is a strong area.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt, but look, where there is the interest, it's not for these guys to tell the community what they want. It's where the interest is that lies within the community that they're prepared to share for us to take advantage of. You know, it might be a pet project, an air monitoring thing, but who's interested? You know, maybe in Hamilton,
So that's
fine. When it comes to coastal, there is a huge gap. We know that. We've already gone through the coastal plan, and the headbutting that I've had to do to try and inform council what's there that we haven't got the data for has left it wanting, really wanting. And if we had 27 years worth of monitoring up to date from citizen science, you'd have a whole different plan going forward and understanding what is there, so we know how to better protect and build on those diversities. So I would suggest, and I'm prepared to put a motion forward, that we do actually look at and select a site which is our coastal area, and the motion being that we ask staff to put forward a proposal and costs associated with setting that up for citizen science to be. So it's not doing it, but pretty much what Brent said, and look at the financial implications so it can be put into an annual plan if the next council support that, to get things going. So, but I guess the motion is so there is no confusion to start on coastal space, our coastal marine area.
Okay.
So yeah, I haven't, the motions, you can.
Okay. Yes, Stu.
I'm not sure if you're planning to have a 5 or 10 minute break at half time, but that would be the good time to try and craft something up.
Yeah, so I think that might be a good idea.
I guess, Fred, where Dennis started, as I recall, was, hey, we've got challenges with swimming site monitoring because of resourcing constraints effectively. So there's an opportunity for citizen science to help us out. And look, we know that, I don't know, I'm not up to date anymore, but half the blooming swimming pools in the country got closed because people didn't have the resourcing to take samples and wherever they had to go to every day. So I'd prefer to keep it a bit more general, because absolutely there's information we like, and there's information that we need to comply with various government regulations, et cetera, and there's also, it's kind of not, it's pointless having a whole bunch of information that tells us certain things if we don't then have the resources to do anything about what that information is telling us as well. So for those reasons, I prefer to keep it a little bit more general, so that we can have staff come back to us with a whole bunch of information that we can actually do something with, rather than direct staff to go down a certain narrow track and then find they're getting really frustrated because they've got a whole lot of, we've given a whole bunch of other directives, or government have given them those directives, and they can't do anything because of the lack of resourcing it, if that makes sense. Because the reality is, we're not going to be changing the coastal plan tomorrow if we get a whole lot of, and I just don't know what the requirements are for some of that stuff, But.
So if I could just grab that, I think it's a really great idea. Can go and break.
Yep.
I just invite Ed and Mike. I think what we're hearing, team, is this report talks about opportunities, and the committee's interested in how might we look at options for for turning opportunities into actions, even if it's starting somewhere and building, and looking for some advice about where we might, which might be a plan for progressively building science into our work programs. So perhaps when we're in a break, maybe you and Mike put your heads together, which might look like a resolution, which would be work which sounds like you're going to be doing anyway, around how do you, because I know that Ed is always looking at how does he optimise information that comes through to support our policy team, to support our regulatory teams. It's business as usual for Ed, but it'll be quite useful for Ed to maybe think of some wording that then the committee would have confidence that that is going to be something that comes through to a new committee and then appropriately funded through an annual planning process. You'll be able to do that while we have a bit of a break, Ed? Yes. Thank you.
It'd be great if you can help us do that.
Comment, not on that, but I guess, Councillor, you talked about a wealth of information that potentially could get lost. And wherever there's a situation like that, we do want to capture that. And so we have the same issue in-house with a lot of information that comes into consent documents and trying to gather that. And so depending where this resolution goes, that is something that we try and facilitate anyway. But what you've raised is the classic thing, and it touches on that database question. As a council, we're often not aware, and myself as staff, aware of, we may know there's this projects, but we haven't made the next connection, the wealth of information, and then how do we get hold of that? And sometimes we're told, no, thank you, that's ours, we've put the effort in. But when it is to be made available, yeah, how? So in this situation, yeah, that's what we try and do. We try to capture this information because we do want to have that centre for it so the science staff can then make observations and decisions from it.
Okay. If I might just make another comment, thanks, Chair.
Yes, you can, Dennis.
Yeah, thanks. Just responding to Stu's point, I think one of the things that's probably missing from the discussion is that the safe swimming water issue is actually a matter of public health as well. So if this information comes through from the lab that there's high levels of E. coli or whatever in an estuary, then the warnings go out to the district council and notices are put up, and the public are warned not to swim. So there is sort of immediacy about that. And also, if you consider, I think there's only 7 or 8 monitoring sites on the Coromandel and the West Coast, or maybe a few more. But, there are literally dozens of areas where people swim in the summer. So if we can expand, that monitoring through a citizen science project, then we're going a long way to assist with, public health issues. And I think that's where perhaps this area is different from some of the others.
Thanks. Good point, Dennis. Now, just before we go adjourn and have a break, I see that Thomas is online and wanted to make a comment.
Sure, if it's
Thomas?
helpful.
Yeah.
In terms of the eDNA, going back decades, scientists have kept a national database of the records of fish by whatever methods necessary in terms of presence of fish. Citizen science eDNA methods for fish presence would feed very well into that, but I would distinguish that from the methods that Bruno and other scientists around the region are developing around quantitative monitoring methods, which would be onerous and laborious for an individual to do. If it was $1,000 a sample sort of thing. Yep. So that would be something we're used to doing and could easily progress with.
Thanks, Thomas. Yeah, I think it might be good actually if we do it. Is 5 minutes enough? Or do we take 10 minutes? Yeah, so let's make it 10 minutes. We need to be back here at 11:30. So use it as a time to grab a coffee, but also let's make sure that when we come back, we actually have a resolution that we all find acceptable. Okay, is that good? Sorry to the people at the back. It means that you have to wait a little bit longer. So sorry about that, Jonathan, and whoever's sitting next to you. Is that Michelle? Yeah, and everybody else. So yeah, so we're going to take a little bit of a break, and anybody else is there anyone else that you think needs to be involved in putting this recommendation together? Ed and Mike? Okay, that's great. Okay, so back here at 11:30. Okay. So we've got